getting up and running. Live stream is booting up right now as we speak. This is super, super duper exciting. Let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Project Egg Show. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Licia Morelli, a best-selling 2016 Maine Literary Award-winning author of The Lemonade Hurricane, a story of mindfulness and meditation, a Tilbury House Publishers work. Licia is a writer of poetry, essays, and prose, and is also the founder of the Cardinal Moon Society, an online space of over 30,000, that's a lot, of writers, readers, seekers, and creatives. Licia has been featured in Boston Magazine, Publishers Weekly, Barnes & Noble, Elephant Journal, and the Rumpus. Licia, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It is an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and was such a delight to have the request. So I'm really excited to chat today.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. What is your story?
My story. So, so I always like to joke that I have taken, as a writer, I have taken the long road to being a writer. But I also got my start on the internet, and I always laugh because I say, well, I've been on the internet since the dawn of time, back in the days when, Twitter wasn't yet quite a thing, but we were all writing on Twitter. And so that's really sort of how I got into this place of acknowledging my writing work and really seeing that something that was a thread throughout my entire life was actually something that I could put to use. And so I started writing jokes on Twitter, and I got published in a book called Twitter Wit because of one of the jokes. And so that kind of got me into the online marketing sphere. And I started a few businesses. At one point, my most successful business was I was an online psychic. So I had started a business doing psychic work and then grew that and then had cancer. And so closed the doors to that because that just wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And then I just started writing, and the writing really took off as soon as I really embraced that was the through line from the time I was 8 until now at 40. As soon as I really understood that, it's when everything started really hitting the ground running. And I wrote my first book in 2015. I have 2 more books coming out in 2020. I work with writers and creatives all the time. I'm also the editorial director for Kate Northrup's company. So I'm working in that capacity in the self-help world as well. So all of that to say, I guess as a writer, I started in my 4th grade class announcing on career day, I would like to be a writer. And it was more in 2008 that really started. And I give Twitter credit for that. And then I've moved since then and have really kind of established myself in that writing sphere, writing about issues like social justice and spirituality, poetry, prose, essays, books, all of it. And that's how I got here.
When you were saying that there came a point when you really realized that writing was your thing, and that was the common thread to all the things you've done, and then you fully embraced that. How did you know? What did that feel like, and how did you put that together?
Well, I think it was everybody says, oh, the 10-year overnight success story. I think for me, it was a little bit of that. For 10 years, I was dabbling in different atmospheres, right? I had businesses, I was working for businesses, I was consulting. But where I took the most joy was when I was writing the stories or the essays. And I also am somebody who's known to have a lot of interests. So like, if I find something new, I will learn all about it. I will totally embrace it. And then I'm like, should this be the job that I'm doing? And it wasn't until probably, in the last 2 years, that I had, taken interest in these new things. And, I would always write about the interests, but never put together that perhaps the reason I was interested in them was not to become that, but to actually write about it so that others could learn from it as well. My most recent example of this, and one would argue that I would still love to be a farmer, but in my most recent poetry manuscript, it's very agrarian. So it's really has to do with the land and the environment and things like that. And while I was writing it, I kept thinking like, well, maybe I'm supposed to be a farmer. Like maybe I'm supposed to, embrace this agricultural lifestyle, buy a farm, have some cows, do all this stuff. And I was sitting with the poetry manuscript one day and I was reading through it as I was going through line edits. And I thought, and it really was, when it clicked fully, it was like a shot in the arm. I was like, you're not supposed to be a farmer. You're supposed to write about this experience so that others can be more connected to the earth. And that is the through line of everything. So like with the psychic work, I was a very successful psychic. It was a great company. I had a great business. What I realized when I closed it was I really wanted to work myself out of a job because I wanted everybody to trust their own intuition, right? So I was supposed to be writing about this sort of intuitive process so that others might learn to trust themselves, right? And then it was like, ding, oh. And then, I was working as a copywriter for a few years and working with startups. And that was super fun because it really infused a lot of more business knowledge for me. And so what I realized during that time was I was writing about the process of being a successful entrepreneur so that others could become successful entrepreneurs. So it really didn't hit me until I was finished with my poetry manuscript. So it was like a 10-year span of me writing and trying new things and then writing about them. And then writing this poetry manuscript, it was like the biggest aha of, no, every single thing I've ever done has been written down so that others can understand it and relate and be in that creative space themselves or that learning space themselves. It's not that I'm supposed to take on every single job that I'm interested in. It's to learn it and then write about it and then help so that others understand it too. So I think that's really when it sunk in. It took me, 3 books.
Do you feel like, well, first of all, I want to say that that's an incredible journey of going through all those things. And it almost seems like, you had to go through those experiences in order to learn that about yourself and to be able to look into yourself.
Exactly. And I think that's what many of us try to skip over, if I'm honest. People want to skip the process of sort of becoming who they are. And if we try, and I did it, I fully raised my hand. I wanted to skip over it. Like, somebody please tell me what to do, And so I had to live through it in order to then fully understand the capacity in which my words were holding a potency for others. And I had to learn it to have the ability to say, I'm a writer, right? Really, we're all writers. If we write things down on pieces of paper, we are writers. But a lot of us have a lot of hangups around like, well, I'm not this as a writer and I'm not that as a writer. And it's just like any art or creative drive, right? You have to kind of live into your authenticity and live into your voice. And if you have to, I look at stuff I wrote 10, 15 years ago, and I'm like, ooh, I was trying really hard. But if I didn't do that, then I wouldn't be here. And my voice will forever be evolving and it will forever be changing. And as I learn and grow, and I think that's the thing, is that if people are listening today, one thing I will tell them is you have to do all of the things that aren't the right thing in order to get to the right thing. And you can't skip those parts because those parts will inform everything you do.
I loved what you said and literally this could be the perfect Twitter quote, but live into your authenticity.
Yes.
I think that is so powerful and so beautiful because there are so many things that that I feel like we want to do and we want to try. You know, in my personal life, like I love podcasting. I love writing too. I love speaking. You know, I love playing basketball, you know, playing guitar, you know, so it's like all these things are there, and it's really hard to say, okay, no, I'm not going to do all of these bajillion things that are all fun and, you know, could be will definitely take a lot of work, but no, I'm going to focus on this one thing. So when you did focus, and like, was it a day that you were like, okay, I'm going to commit to this, I'm not going to do anything else but write it in that capacity?
Yeah.
I'm all in. Like, what did that actually look like for you?
So, I would say, Ben, that over the last 3 years, it was a slow kind of devotion to writing, right? So how that looked, and for creatives out there, I know the number one thing that people run into is resistance to their craft, right? I mean, and I consider entrepreneurs creatives. I consider, you know, knitters creative, whoever. Like, you run into resistance to this craft. And so what I realized was that if I wasn't devoted to the practice of writing, then I was never going to figure out what it is that I was supposed to do with this gift that I've been given, right? And not one to be dismissive of the sort of universal truths coming at me. I was like, well, okay, how can I, without expectation and without any sort of plan, say to myself, if I am a writer, then I should be writing. So what does that look like? And so about 3 years ago, I started waking up between 5 and 5:30 every morning to write. And the way it started was my kids are now 11 and 8, but at the time, you know, they were young enough that they would still get up really, really early. And so I knew I had to get up early enough where I had an hour to myself. And that hour was dedicated to writing. I had no idea what would happen in that time. I had no idea why I was doing it. All I knew is that from 5:30 to 6:30, I would be writing, and maybe I would write a sentence, and maybe I would write a lot, but I was going to be up and I was going to be ready for it. So I started doing that. And at the time, I still wasn't really like, oh, I'm a writer. I mean, I had a book out, but I was still trying to convince myself of this profession, you know. But one thing I will say is that I love that I still have a day job, and I love the work I do outside of it, because my time for writing is my time, and there's no pressure on it, because then I go to my job, right? And so just a PSA for the creatives out there, like, don't quit your day job. Because if you're, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this in her book, Big Magic, if you're putting the pressure on your creativity to be your way that you pay for your life, it gets a little hard. So I start this practice. In the first year, you know, it ebbs and flows. I'm up for 6 months at a time, then I get kind of tired, or it's summer or something like that, and I stop for a month or two, then I get back on track. And at the time, I'm not really producing anything. I'm taking classes for writing. I'm going on retreats. I'm writing more essays. And then year 2 comes along, and I'm doing it again. And it wasn't until year 3, much like we know with businesses, year 3 is the year where you either know it's going to work or it's not going to work. It wasn't until year 3 where I really felt like the magic kind of happened. And I will never forget that it was winter, and it was dark in the morning, and I had my candle going, and I had my, you know, writing exercises that I was doing. And it was like a voice next to me just said, "This is you, writer." And I thought, wow. And so it really sunk in that, and also nothing has changed. I still get up at 5:30 to 6:30. It wasn't like some lightning bolt occurred and I suddenly was like, oh, this now success and all of these things. No, it wasn't that. It was something sunk inside of my soul, and I believed in what I was doing. And, you know, I think that's really the point of why I do Cardinal Moon Society, is I want people to connect with themselves and in order to connect with their creativity. And I think this is where we can really learn that it took 3 years for me. It took since I was 8, all those years ago, till just recently for me to fully believe what I was doing. And it took 3 years of me being devoted to a practice to really believe in it as well.
There was so much knowledge and wisdom in that last bit that you just said. Like, I am seriously blown away by that.
Oh, good.
And the two things that really stuck out to me were, one, that it is a practice. It is a practice. And you're not just going to wake up one day and be like, I'm the best at this.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. But practicing it and working at it. And that's incredible that you wake up at 5:30 every day to give yourself a full hour of uninterrupted time to just practice and work at it and hone your craft. I think that's amazing. And I had a question on that. Mm-hmm. Big surprise there, right?
I love a
question. So the question is, what happens if somebody decides, okay, I want to be whatever they want to be, right? I want to be a guitar player.
Yeah.
And so they start practicing, they start waking up early, they start, or they just stay up an hour later, whatever their practice is. And they start doing it. And a few months go by and they just really don't like it. And they're like, wow, I really think I may have chosen the wrong practice. What do you do? Do you stick it out? Do you reevaluate, choose a new practice? Like, how do you go about that sort of situation?
Yeah. Well, Ben, permission to pivot. This is my favorite thing to tell people. You are allowed to change your mind. This is okay. It doesn't mean that, you should change your mind every time when it gets tricky or hard and you're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to do it anymore. I quit. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when you know in your bones, you have not made the right decision and this isn't going to work for you long term. It is okay to make a plan to pivot. And then what I tell people, own your pivot. Don't apologize for it. Don't say, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to do this anymore. Just kidding. Just be like, hey, I did it. This was amazing. I learned so much. Here's what it was. Here's what I'm doing now. Right. And a perfect example that I use is I started running long distances last year, about 1.5 years ago. And I loved it. I so badly wanted to be an ultra marathoner. I went from 0 miles per week to 40 miles per week in not that long of a time. I hired a coach. I did everything. I wrote about the running. I thought it was incredible. And then my hip it was crushed. Like it wasn't going to fulfill this dream of mine to be an ultra runner. And I knew it. And I knew the more I ran, the more it hurt. And I was like, this isn't working. And I sat and I had kind of a long talk with myself. And I was like, you could keep running or you could listen to your body. And who cares that your audience has seen you running now for 1 year and doing all this training? And who cares that you're not able to do the race? Who cares? Right? Because I was doing like a race at the end of it all. And that was going to be my pinnacle point. And so what I did was I just said, fine, I'm not going to run anymore. I can barely walk at this point. I'm not able to run. I'm okay with that. And I pivoted and I started writing about something else. And people were like, great, we were inspired by your running and now we're inspired by this. And so this is something that I always carry with me. And I tell all of the people that I work with and the creatives that I work with, like, permission to pivot and then own that pivot. Because if you know that you're done with something and it's not working for you, your audience or your community or the people you work with will trust that. You trust yourself and they will be inspired by that trust that you have. And they will know that when it's time for them to pivot, they can also pivot for something that's not right for them. And so that's sort of what I tell people. Like, if you pick up guitar and you're like, I'm going to be the next most amazing guitar player, and 3 months in, you're like, I am terrible at this and I don't want to do it anymore. Own it, right? That's human. Like, at least you tried, and at least you went for it. And I think that that's the key component, is that we are allowed to change our minds, and be very aware of yourself, that you're not changing your mind because of resistance. You're changing your mind because it really, truly isn't the thing for you. And you might have to think about it, but you're allowed to change your mind.
Okay, seriously, I thought before that my mind was blown, but now that is awesome.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah. Because that's almost a liberating feeling of like, okay, I know I can go for it, because if I go for it and I fail, okay, that's fine. I can pivot. If I go for it and I don't like it, okay, that's fine too. I can pivot, but at least I tried. And what you were saying about letting your audience know and owning that pivot, if you stay doing something that you're not really passionate about, or that isn't really the thing, that isn't really your thing, and you can't be the most you can't be the most genuine, other people can feel that. Yeah. Other people can pick that up in a heartbeat, like a shark in water smelling blood. Like, they will know. So I think that will almost hold you back more than anything. If you're like, my whole being is saying to go this way, but I've been doing this for a while. People can definitely tell when you're being authentic and genuine.
100%. And to go back to your point, Ben, about the shark in the water, something that I have noticed, just even in my consulting and my own businesses, is that when people are not aligned with what they're doing, and they're forcing themselves to do it, if you want to look at it from just a nuts and bolts standpoint, somebody who's gone from never having refund requests, never having complaints, never, they're batting 90% success. Like, there's always somebody who wants a refund or something like that, but it's not very ongoing. And then suddenly they're seeing it more and more. It's a true identifier to say your audience, the people you're trying to serve, are not buying what you're selling, and you're not doing it from a place that you once were. And that is a true testament to like the feedback aspect of like, okay, this isn't working. What in me do I need to know, because this outside avenue is happening? And it's an opportunity for reflection. And I think that we are doing a disservice to folks if our voices are strained because we're forcing ourselves to keep at something that we are now exhausted by, or we don't align with, or we would rather be saying something else. And the good news is, and this is what I love about a pivot, is that you will take every single thing you learned in that previous aspect, an iteration, and put it in place newly in this new iteration. And who you were in this iteration is not who you are in this one, but you're much wiser, and you can speak to things in a new way with new vision and new ability. And I think that's the beautiful thing, is like, identify it, understand it, learn from it, and then go for it.
I think that's very wise, because when you are bringing all of that with you, not only do you get the skills, the confidence, the knowledge, the same people who loved you in one area, maybe not all of them are going to come with you from pivot to pivot, but some of them, the real fans, or the true audience. But it also gives you a story.
Right.
It also gives you like a whole narrative of like, hey, I did this and that and that and that and this, and because of all of these things, I know now to do this, this, and that. Right. So that could almost be, even more of a pull factor, of an attraction factor for people to come and, be around you and be part of your community and engage with you, because you're a real person. You're not saying, I'm perfect and everything that I've done has always worked out. No, you're saying, try this. That was a failure. but I learned these things. And so
Right.
I think that's powerful. Really
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, an example that I give folks is that I left behind, I really closed up shop in a lot of ways. You know, I stopped the email list that I had. I just started totally fresh from the ground up, and it's grown faster because I know I'm aligned with what I'm supposed to be doing than I've ever experienced before. And the reason for that is because I am coming from a place that understands, you know, I want my community to feel seen. I want them to feel loved. I want them to feel like they belong. And I'm doing it in a way that is how I want to do it, not how I think it should be done. And that, I think, is just a growth process. And that goes back to us talking about, you have to live into these experiences. And the more experiences you have, the more you learn. And I think that's really what is the most important piece. Is you can't leap over that. You have to live through it.
When you were talking about doing things how you want it done, or how you want to do it, versus doing it in a way, in the way of how you think it should be done.
Right.
Can you drill down on that a little bit more? Because what I think you might be saying is something to the effect of, like, other people are out there doing their thing and that might work for them, but for you to really own your space and really, like, make a dent and be powerful and be genuinely yourself, like, you got to do things your own way. That's what it made me think, but I would love to hear more about what you're thinking.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. You know, I'll just talk about it from the writing perspective to start, and then kind of go to the broader view of what that looks like currently. So from the writing perspective, oftentimes it's really clever to write about things that are of interest to people, you know, that are hot topics, right? It's like, okay, well, what do the people want to hear about today? And then you look and you're like, oh, well, they want to hear about this, so I'll write about that. So you're aligning with sort of the mass market, right? And you're saying, okay, I'm going to be clever and I'm going to write this thing and it's going to be for the mass market. And that's how I'm going to get attention, right? So that's one way of doing it. And it works. I mean, PR agencies everywhere will tell you it works. So I have no beef with that. But what happens then when you shift as a writer into a more sort of space of yourself, you begin to write directly from the space within yourself, and you listen to what's inside of you, and you write it out and you put it out there, and you don't look for feedback. You don't look for the likes. You don't look for the shares. You don't look for, I mean, granted, I'm guilty of this too. If I have an article go up, I'm like, refresh, and then I have to, like, remove myself from my computer because it's, it's the way of the world. So, but my point is as I'm writing it because it's what's inside of me that needs to come out, not what's outside of me that I can latch onto. So there's that. Something that I've noticed is I've started doing that more and more because I have a background in marketing. So marketing is always top of mind for me. And so I really had to wrangle. Marketing and sales is also part of my background. So, like, I really had to wrangle with, okay, am I in the salesperson place or am I in myself as writer? Like, what am I doing? And I had to really pay attention to that. And so something that stemmed from that as well was I started my new website for Cardinal Moon Society, and it is a landing page, Ben. That's it. Everything happens in the emails. Nothing happens on the website. Like, there's the landing page where you sign up for the emails, and that's where everything happened. And I did that intentionally because for me, if I was going to be creating a community, I wanted them to interact with me in emails. I wanted the space to feel more behind the scenes rather than out on the, people are always laughing because they're like, well, do you have an about page? And I'm like, oh, no. I have an Instagram post that talks a little bit about me, like it's totally somewhat intentional. I did an interview with Amber Lillestrom, and we were laughing because she was like, her assistant, Kristen, who's amazing, was like, it's kind of hard to find Licia on the internet. And Amber was like, I think that's intentional. And it is kind of, because I'm doing it in a way that I want people to come through my doors and feel like I see them and that they belong, and that it's not just this one way. And so those are two examples of how I came back to do things differently, to create community differently. And that's how I'm doing it. So when I'm writing, if I'm writing, let's say, an article and a poem about the full moon, I'm writing it for me. And then it happens to align with the full moon, because that's what my newsletter is wanting to hear about, right? Or whatever it ends up being, or if it's like a social justice piece, or however, like, it happens to line up with what's happening with the world, but it's written from a space of, what do I want to say about this? Not what do I think the world wants me to say about this?
So when it comes to building your community, and you have over 30,000 people in there, so, clearly it's working. Mm-hmm. They go to your website, they sign up for your email list. What's the journey like for them from there?
So it's pretty simple. It's like the most simple thing. What happens is they come, they sign up for the email list, they get a response email, an autoresponder, just to say, hey, you're here. Here's what to expect, right? Here's what we do here. And then every single week, I send a newsletter. And in that newsletter, it is geared towards sort of because the moon, we all have the moon, right? Being that it's Earth Day today, the Earth and the moon, like, these are the things we all have in common. Wendell Berry said, like, the Earth is it, here we are. We all have this in common. So for me, it's sort of like the moon is that sort of deciding factor. Like, everyone can look to the sky. The moon creates the tides. We are made up of mostly water. How does this then affect us creatively? Probably quite significantly. So I write a weekly newsletter just about what phase the moon is in and how that helps us creatively. And then, a little bit of like what you can do to honor your creative space in this moon phase. So what happens then is I let people know I also have a paid newsletter. So they can then sign up, and that paid newsletter is more specific. It's not only the creative aspects of the moon and what's going on and a little ceremony you can do to help yourself with your creativity, but then it goes deeper. It's writing prompts for writers to be able to get their butts in the chair and start writing. Because I also believe that a 15-minute writing exercise is like the gateway to actually writing. So they get that in the paid newsletter, and then they get, information on books I'm reading, podcasts I'm listening to, interesting people to follow to inspire them. So that's the next step. And then sort of what happens from there is people get, you get the emails, you find out, like, okay, if I'm having a writing retreat, they learn about the writing retreat through the emails. Whatever's happening, they either are on the free side or the paid side, but either way, the email is where they understand what's going on. And then I personally email people who email me, and it's really important to me to do that. So what will happen is I'll ask questions in the newsletter, and people will write back, and I will intentionally read the email and write them back as though we are pen pals. And I think it's the reason why I bring that up, Ben, is because I think we have lost so much of that, and I think there is a time when we can't wrangle all the emails that come in, and, customer service comes in, and however that looks for people. But if you can keep your pulse on 20% of the emails that you're specifically responding to as a business owner or as somebody who has a community, that goes a long way, because it keeps you in touch with who your audience is. And it also gives that personal effect. Like, while I can't, I still, fortunately, knock on wood, can answer all the emails. But if there ever came a time where I'm not able to, I would still want to be able to have a percentage that I am answering personally, regardless of what they're saying, good, bad, indifferent.
So you basically run your whole ecosystem through email.
Yes.
Do you do anything on social media? Like, what's your relationship with that?
So my Instagram account is the other space that I spend a lot of time, because I feel like Instagram right now, and who knows what will happen in the future, with algorithms and, takeovers. But I spend a lot of time there because it does feel, it still feels small to me as well. And I think, a lot of people who don't make it to my email list spend a lot of time there and interact with me in my DMs. In my comments. So I really try to spend time on Instagram, but Facebook, I don't really spend a lot of time on anymore. I used to try to do both, but I wanted the emails to be my focus and the newsletter to be my focus. And I didn't want things distracting. And I knew Instagram and the emails were going to be my capacity.
So when it comes to the content for email and for Instagram, do you repurpose content? Like do you start with the paid and then take a snippet out for the free and then take a smaller snippet out for Instagram? Like how do you manage all of that content creation?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and one I think that it will really, really helpful for people as they begin to sort of think through these things. So I know my whole audience doesn't see me in email. I know this for a fact. I know that, a lot of them see me on Instagram, a lot of them see me on email. And then if I have a magazine article or something that I write, they see me there. So here's what happens. The free email gets the write-up, the questions, and sort of the ritual or ceremony, however you want to call it, to kind of connect with their creativity. Everybody gets that, right? Then on Instagram, like a day after that email goes out, I will take part of the free email and post it as a post, and then tell people, if you want more of this, go to my email, because you'll get it first. You'll get the ceremony. You'll get so much more in the email. So I don't take the whole email and put it on Instagram. I just take, a paragraph or two. And then for the paid subscribers, they get, of course, the write-up, the ceremony, the information about the moon, and then they also get their writing prompts, their books, the podcasts, things like that. And I send those to, so the free people and the paid people get their content on the same day. Everybody else will get it like the day after, or, a day after that, because you still can, so it's still pertinent in those 3 days. And then if I have an article, let's say I'm writing for an article on Elephant Journal, I will take part of the free email and send that as the article, because it's not published publicly. So I then take it, make that my post for Elephant Journal, and they don't get all of the email that's free, but they get part of it and the poem, because I want my poetry out there. So it really is pretty strategic in how I repurpose, because I don't ever want the people on my newsletter list to get something that everybody gets for free. I want the people that have signed up, they will always get the most information. Mm-hmm. Everybody else gets parts of the information. They don't get the whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's brilliant, because the main place where you want people, email.
Yes.
So you give them the most.
Right.
And then the other places, because email, it's hard for email to like organically grow itself. Mm-hmm. You need to be getting other people from outside of your email list to be like, hey, come hang out with me. Right. So it seems like that's what you're using Instagram for, to take a snippet of the email, put it out on Instagram and be like, hey, if you enjoyed this, you'll really enjoy even more of it in my email list. And then the article seems like that's another way to like leverage other channels that are not social media, to where it's blasting to the world, but like leveraging another community and getting seen on other channels that aren't like social media.
Exactly. Because where my community might be hanging out is, they may say like, I'm taking a social media cleanse, mm-hmm. or whatever's happening now, but they're still reading articles online. And so I'm capturing their attention and saying like, hey, you can still come over and join my email list. So I think it's really important, because we are so busy, that people don't feel like they have to make something new every single second of every single day. If you want to be effective in garnering the attention of your ideal community people, use what you've already done and help them see it in different spaces. Because maybe even the email people, maybe they missed the email, but they saw it on Instagram and they still feel like they got fulfilled.
So I want to kind of put you on the spot a little bit, and ask a question. How would you go about building that sort of content flow? I guess that's the best word to describe, like that content flow. How would you go about building that out for Project Egg?
Well, tell me a little bit more, tell me a little, for you, start by giving me kind of your basic, we'll break it down, Ben. Give me your basic, what does your content release look like on a daily basis? So how does that look? And then we can.
Yeah. So Monday through Friday, we're typically doing anywhere from 1 to 5 interviews. And recently, which I'm extremely excited about, we started to live stream them. So that goes out to about 18 different platforms. Then after the live stream ends, my team gets the video footage and extracts the audio from it and publishes it as a podcast on, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, all those platforms. And then we build thumbnails, graphics, and we publish those to Pinterest, publish those to Instagram, and Twitter as well, and Tumblr, and Medium, and a few other channels there. So that's kind of the flow right now. But then there's also an email list where, I might write up a little helpful thing that I learned, or a helpful tip or trick that I've picked up and that I use. And then I try to ask a question at the end there. And then there's also a Facebook group for Project Egg. And, I definitely don't do a good enough job with that, because, I'm very grateful for the group members there. And the group actually started before the show, which is interesting. So I feel like they need something even more special. And so I think, maybe like a presentation or a speech or sort of a webinar style thing could be a cool way to move forward with that. But that's what we have so far.
Yeah. So my question to you is, when you disseminate everything across the social media channels, is it same day, or is it different? Is it a week late? How do you do that? So we're live streaming now, your team will extract it, put it on iTunes. And then what happens? How much, is it the same day it goes out to social? Is it the same day it goes out to your newsletter? How does that happen?
Yeah. So whenever it gets posted on SoundCloud, that immediately goes to Twitter.
Okay.
Then a couple days later, whenever, because we then put it in the queue, in the scheduling queue to get distributed on Pinterest and Instagram.
Okay.
So that may take a couple days. It may take a week. Depends on how many interviews we still have in the queue at that time.
Yeah. So a couple of things that jump out. I love that you're using all the different channels and avenues. I think that's so smart to do the video and then the, extraction. And I just think it's so good. You're meeting people right where they are, whether it's their ears or their eyes. A couple of things that you might want to consider is, you want to give your Facebook, something I heard you say is you want to give your Facebook group, a little bit of something extra. Well, it doesn't have to necessarily start out as teaching a class or a webinar. You could actually post for them highlights of the upcoming week. You can write a post that says, hey, I'm live streaming these guests this week. Then you have a 1 or 2 line bit of, what they offer, so people can just like, and then a way to kind of add it to their calendar. So this is a way that they are getting something before anything happens. Maybe it goes out on a Sunday before you're starting your week. They then can add it to their calendar. They can watch the live stream. They get kind of VIP access. I would actually do this with your newsletter list as well, like a Sunday mailer that's like, hey, this week, add whatever interviews you want to watch live to your calendar. Here they are. And then you're sort of setting them up as they're doing their sort of planning for the week. They can be like, oh, I want to listen to this person. And you're getting eyes on the guests that you have in order for people to know exactly what to expect from your interviews. So those are two sort of ways that I would kind of like VIP your newsletter list and your Facebook group. So then you have the live streaming, and that's great. That's happening in real time. What I would do with then once I would plan to reshare the live stream video a month, 2 months, 3 months out. So people get it immediately or they get it again in 2 months. And this way you are able to sort of create an editorial calendar every quarter with all of the interviews that you're doing, and you're planning them out so they're like way out there, and you're also getting people the live right away type of thing. So that's something else I would consider too. So like really utilizing your timeline, not feeling like, oh, I have to send this out in the same week or 2 weeks. I can actually send it to, let's say Pinterest and Facebook become your 2 months out social shares. So you and I are doing this article today. Your social team marks the calendar 2 months from now. You're re-releasing content 2 months from now that we did that not everybody saw in the email on Facebook, and now it's back. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's how I would kind of start, because I think you already have a great trajectory, but utilize the space and time that you can for all the people that maybe didn't see it or weren't on your list now, but would love this conversation 3 months from now. So we always have to be thinking like not everybody will be able to consume the content we're putting out that same day, but they sure do love to hear about it when they are ready. And so it's just really giving that content over and over and planning it, every quarter.
Well, that's the third time I'm going to say it, but seriously, those are some serious value bombs that you just dropped. So, thank you.
I'm so glad. I think too, like what I really would be excited for you, Ben, is that sort of VIP Facebook like roundup, as well as the email roundup for your email subscribers. Like I would actually be curious what the feedback would be if you start to do that, especially if they have the ability to add it to their Google Cal. Because that is one thing that I need in my life is if somebody's like, I have this interview coming up, I want to be able to like click a link, which I know we can do, right? I don't get paid to be techie. So this is why I know this is possible. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. There's other people for that. But you add it, then there's an immediate ability to add to your Google Calendar. And then it's just in your calendar and you're reminded. So now your audience is like super aware of what you're doing and you're super top of mind. So
I really, really cannot thank you enough for all the time that we've been able to share, and
thank you,
for you coming on the interview, and thank you very much.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Absolutely. So I have 2 quick questions for you, or I don't want to limit it. A couple more questions for you, then we'll wrap up. I want to be respectful of your time. The first is, what is your philosophy on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connection with another human being?
I love this question because this is what the Cardinal Moon Society is about. My philosophy is that people feel seen, heard, and that they belong, and that you and I, as two people interacting, are two people interacting. Even though we are not in person, we are people. And I think that's my biggest thing of what is my intention when I'm talking to somebody? How do I want them to feel when they are done talking to me? And I never, ever, ever want somebody to feel dismissed when they have interacted with me. And I think we live in a society where dismissiveness is something that's a poison throughout all avenues. We are so easy to dismiss. We're so easy to put somebody in a box. And that's why our conversations are intense in the online atmosphere and in person. So my philosophy is that I want to interact with people. I want to make sure that they feel like I see them, I hear them, I understand them, and that they belong.
Has that always been your philosophy, or how did that develop?
Well, I think that something that really kind of rang true, I learned my dear friend Gina Gomez always talks about intention. She's amazing. Everyone should go follow her on I am Gina Gomez. But she's amazing because she will talk about what is our intention, versus expectation. And I learned that from her a few years ago. And that started to switch in my mind. I realized that I had a lot of expectations of people that they weren't living up to. Go figure, admittedly, I was wrong. So it really has been a process, just studying different modalities of spirituality, writing a lot about these types of things. It wasn't until probably 2014 when I had cancer that, obviously I always wanted to be a kind and loving person, but I didn't really understand what it meant to make people feel like I see you and I hear you, if they weren't in my immediate community, right? If a stranger on the street, right? And so I really have worked over these last 5-6 years on, okay, what does that mean to me? Like, what does somebody feeling like they belong mean to me? And really what, like I said, what is my intention of interacting with this person? And that's why I won't respond to an email if I'm in a hurry, because I don't want dismissiveness to come. You get an email from me, I have shown you that I've read your email. I have shown you that I see what you're saying and what you're asking, and I have responded in kind. The only, I won't send you an email that says, thanks, exclamation point. It won't happen. Even if we have gone back and forth several times, I will still, acknowledge that our conversation has been great. And it might be shorter than the initial email, but I really, that was something that I learned recently, is just like, I'm noticing it more and more of the dismissiveness of everything. And so I don't want that.
What's your greatest theory?
Oh God. My greatest theory. I think my greatest theory is that love is actually at the center of all things. And, because I had cancer in 2014 and I did almost die, it was not, an easy, not that any cancer is easy, but like, it was really like, okay, I could die. I'm grappling with mortality. It sort of showed me that love really is at the center of it all. You get that close to losing your human existence and you start to see, gosh, even at people's worst, if you can find that teeny tiny pilot light of love and connect there, things can change. That's my theory.
So, Licia, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the interview today and sharing this time with me. I really am appreciative of it. Got 2 more questions for you, and then we'll wrap it on up.
Yeah.
First is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that we did not talk about today? In other words, what did I miss?
I mean, I commend you. I think you did your research, and I think we covered everything that I would hope to cover. I appreciate that. So I don't really have, other than the fact that I don't have an about page for people, I don't really feel like I have anything else I would share. I feel like we really covered it.
So then last question for you. I'm 24 and, we talked about a few of the things that I'm doing. I also have another business on the side. Is there anything that I should, or what should I be asking you, specifically me, asking specifically you with your experience, your knowledge, your wisdom, your genius, that I just wouldn't think to ask?
I think, and I'm kind of thinking about my own self as a 24-year-old and getting started in the world, is really pay attention to the people that are older than you. I mean, I think this is something that we're losing in our society as well. Lived experience is so valuable. I don't pretend to know everything. I certainly don't. But when I listen to even my mother, and I don't, again, dismiss anything that's coming at me, or I listen to my dad, I am reminded that their lived experience, while it's not the same as mine, they have a clue. And I think, like, if you're talking to people, and we're older than you, or, I'm not so older than you, but like if we're talking to our elders, really asking, I'm in this phase of my life, like, what was your biggest takeaway? And I can tell you that when I was from 24 to 30, there were a lot of life lessons. I got married at 26. I had my first child at 29. I did a lot during those years, but I couldn't rush them either. So again, just this notion of asking, like, gosh, what was your experience? Is this normal? Because I think we all just think we're like floating out there alone, and we're not. Our friends are kind of going through the same stuff, but they don't know, like, we don't know. And so, even for me now in this part of my life, which is totally different than the first part of my life, I think to myself, my gosh, I really want to pay attention to my friends who are almost 50, or my parents who are in their 70s, because they know what these years are like, and these years present different things than my 20s did. So I think that's really what I would say, for someone like you asking questions, like really listening to what the lived experience is, even though sometimes we do want to roll our eyes like, okay, like, all right, but we do learn a lot when we ask, and we hear the stories of people as they have lived before us. So that's what I would say.
I think that's great advice. And thank you very much for sharing that. And again, thank you so much for coming on the interview.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. It was such a joy to be here today. I really appreciate it.
And for everybody who's listening, watching, regardless of when you're listening, watching, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love y'all very, very much. So, I don't know how else to express my gratitude to you besides saying thank you. Thanks for sticking with us till the end. Thanks for supporting the show, for being here. Y'all rock. Y'all are the real MVP. So thank you very much. Let's change the world.